Here we are, at the conclusion of the final season of The Dragon Prince. At the very least, it's the final season as far as I'm aware. Netflix has largely been clear in its marketing for this season as the epic conclusion to the saga. And I'm pretty sure the show needed a big viewership bump in order to get another renewal. I don't think that's in the cards. I wouldn't be shocked to see it get picked up elsewhere if that's something that's allowed to happen. I'm not hugely versed in the ins and outs of contract law, so maybe they could be picked up. I don't know. All I know is that this season was just bad, wasn't it? Don't get me wrong. There were actually a lot of plot points and storylines I liked, but the writing just absolutely let it down in the worst ways possible at the same time. Plus, they left the main story unfinished, and since they have no definitive path forward in production and distribution, it feels like a massive middle finger to longtime fans. I walked away from Season 7 feeling a bit betrayed and very much let down. I've loved this show for years, since those glory days of Seasons 1 to 3. The show felt huge in those days. It felt fresh and exciting, filled with so much mystery and potential. It felt very morally grey and nuanced in the best of ways. Lots of drama and angst and romance and action. It was very clearly made on a budget, but that didn't matter because the writing well and truly made up for it. That first arc ending with Viren falling off a cliff was epic and well received, and his resurrection and the reveal that Claudia had been alone for 3 years with Erebos whispering in her ears to help revive him was such a huge cliffhanger. Then we had COVID delays, and it seems the writers just forgot that well-written episodes and plot points that make sense should be your main priority. They broke up Raylan off screen when the first 3 seasons had been building them up for so long, and the seasons became plodding and rather cringy in dialogue and content. Very preachy. Then we got Season 6 though, and we were just so back. It was top tier, the story was interesting, and Erebos cemented himself as an all-timer villain of the saga. They brought back so much of that moral ambiguity that was missing from what had become a goofy, happy-go-lucky cartoon for the most part. It was getting serious again. They had all the tools they needed to make a really fitting conclusion, even if they were a bit strapped for time. Of course, it didn't end up playing out like that, did it? I'm devastated and I'm pissed off like I haven't felt in quite a while. And it seems that a lot of other fans are in a similar boat to me. I really don't understand how you snatch defeat from the jaws of victory so easily. It makes no sense. Really, it's all to do with the writing. Everything else I'd normally talk about was the same as it always was, wasn't it? The animation and design, the music, it's not on the level of a bigger budget franchise, but at the same time I think it has a lot of charm. Although, that being said, I do think over the years the visuals have improved, just not a whole heap. Regardless though, a show like this will live and die by the story. This time it died by the story. It was garbage, straight garbage, and we all know it. There's really so much to hate about it, and we will get to all of that in time. First though, I actually want to start by talking about plot points and storylines that I legitimately liked. There were a few after all. I don't think this season was completely devoid of any sort of quality. For starters, and this may be controversial, I don't know, I really like a lot of Ezran's arc in this season. Maybe not every element that was tied up in it, but his overall growth that we saw as a result of everything he went through. For years, for seasons. No matter what happened to this kid, he would take it on the chin and manage to keep a positive outlook on life. His dad was assassinated by elves on the order of the Dragon Queen. That's all good. Peace and forgiveness are the most important things. The cycle of violence has gone on too long, yada yada yada. Viren tries to overthrow and kill him. Simple life imprisonment will do for him. And he forgave Soren for being involved, and was clearly open to giving Claudia a path to redemption too. That's all well and good, but when you have a character who's always positive and peaceful no matter the context or situation, it gets very old. His character had become preachy and stagnant, and all of this culminated last season with the destruction of Catullus at the hands of Sol Riggum. This was a crucial and pivotal moment in the tale, which set him up for a lot of potential changes in this season. Thank God they followed through on them. He becomes more assertive, more driven, and more aggressive in the pursuit of his goals. He does a pretty big number of important things as well. He arrests Runan and contemplates killing Rayla when she busts him out. He joins forces with Queen Anya to begin developing weapons the humans can use to defend their kingdoms from powerful figures such as dragons and elves and whatnot. Then he decides that imprisonment is not enough for Erebos and that sometimes you have to make a choice. And that killing somebody to save everybody is sometimes the only path you can take. All of these plot points I found very satisfying from an Ezran perspective. His kingdom was destroyed, everything's in shambles, and the elf that killed his father and perhaps a bunch of other soldiers in Catullus turns up, and he's just expected to be cool with this. From a purely pragmatic standpoint, it is a mistake to arrest Runan, as it alienates a powerful ally in Rayla. But I like that he's flawed here. Ezran's always been pragmatic with his forgiveness, yet where does it lead him? A shattered kingdom when all he ever strived for was for peace. So for him to switch it up and make the wrong choice from a tactical point of view was a really interesting divergence from his character. Plus, it opened up a lot of different moral questions. Is Runan the only person that should be brought to justice? After all, Rayla was involved. It was ordered by Zubeir. She ordered a hit on a child, on Ezran. She hasn't faced repercussions. Has she even apologized on screen? So should Runan front all the blame? You could argue either way, but personally, I understood where he's coming from, and it added to his character. Hell, I think you could argue that he is 100% justified in what he's doing here. Not like he sent out a strike force to drag Runan away from his house. Dude turned up in his kingdom. Arresting a head of state like Zubeir was never going to work, and in a court of law, you could argue she had lost her sanity and thus would be not guilty of murder. Remember, her husband was dead, she thought her child was dead, then afterwards she faded into a depression coma. Runan had all his faculties, and he chose to do what he did. He would be guilty of murder. Screw it, Ezran did nothing wrong here. Hell, they didn't even know Erebos was back at this point, so it's not like he realized that he had to play nice to keep some allies on side. He felt like he could do this. I also really like that he doesn't forgive Runan at the end. He says he wants to and he'll try, but he's clearly not at that stage yet. What did piss me off about this story though, was the Harrow bird reveal. Felt like a lame twist to try to remove any guilt from Runan and ensure that it's going to be one big happy family at the end. After all, it does feel like a last minute plot twist. Why wouldn't Viren reveal this after he reformed and was chucked in prison? Why would he keep lying? I feel like the moment had well and truly passed, and they were just doing this to try to manipulate the audience into not thinking Ezran should be angry anymore, as the motivation would be gone. On top of that, I love that he became proactive in the defense of his people too. In a world where there's another race of humanoids that can use magic and has a history of human oppression, and there's a race of flying lizards who also have a less than stellar track record with humanity, why wouldn't you make and use weapons to protect yourself? Especially after your castle and capital of the kingdom was torched by a blind dragon. Imagine if one of the other archdragons that could see decided they were eager to kill humans too. You've got to be able to fight back. So I'm glad that Ezran was able to see that. Same with him deciding to try to use the Nova Blade to kill Erebos in order to ensure that Callum doesn't use dark magic. Maybe he was a little bit misguided, but he was out of time and he had to make a choice. For me, this was such a massive pivot in his characterization and some of the best writing of the season. It made him a far more well-rounded protagonist as a result, and it actually showed the consequences of all the terrible things that have been happening all this time. If his kingdom burned down and there was nothing he learned from it or nothing changed, it would have been very poor writing and a railroaded story. I also really liked the whole Claudia, Erebos and Terry storyline. This was probably the most interesting one in the entire season, and the one I was most invested in. Erebos, in the final episode of Season 6, came out of nowhere to become the show's most interesting character. And he wasn't slowing down at all this season, not one bit. His conversations with Terry, Claudia, and Ezran were all really interesting, and he was the perfect example of a deeply compelling and well-written, morally grey villain. On the one hand, you sympathise with him quite a lot. He lost his daughter for no real reason other than cruelty, and a lot of his points about elves and dragons are correct. On the other hand, he clearly doesn't have much care about who gets in his way and what he has to do to achieve his goals. He masterminded the fall of Catullus. He's willing to kill any elves, dragons, or creatures he pleases. And even though he professes to love Claudia, he still makes sure to try to isolate her by driving Terry away. So I think he's still a bad guy, but maybe he's not completely a bad guy, if that makes sense. I especially enjoyed how the dynamic shifted between him and Claudia over the course of the season. For ages I've been talking about a Claudia redemption arc and how Erebos is 100% going to betray her and she'll rejoin her family. But that's not what happened. At all. Instead, they found a surrogate father and daughter bond, one that felt earned and most importantly, felt real. You see Erebos go from this mysterious, enigmatic figure to this father enamored with his goofy child. You see Claudia start to move on from Viren's death and at last accept that he's gone for good and was at peace with himself at long last. There's no unfinished business there. Together, I think they heal each other, and I kind of hope that if the show ever does continue, they keep them on the same side until the bitter end. That moment where Erebos opened a portal to allow Claudia to escape before his body dies so he won't lose another daughter, that's an all-time classic moment from the show. Hit me right in the feels. In a season where so many character dynamics went to die, this was a standout for me, and I loved how they showed the different dynamic with the intro segment, and how their relationship is different to the one with Viren. Claudia is precious to him, but Viren was a pawn. On top of that, I enjoyed Terry quite a lot too. He sort of had an opposite type of arc to Ezran, didn't he? Whereas Ezran feels like he has to change and do things differently to protect the world, Terry realizes he can't allow himself to change or be changed in order to do much of the same. So he has to turn away from Claudia to preserve who he is as a person. And this puts him in a position to help try to save the world. Took long enough, as I always felt like it was weird to have this guy who's obviously good at heart keep turning his face away when Claudia's doing heinous shit. In the end though, I think they actually pulled the trigger at the right time, and it worked well. I'm not sure if the show ever continues that there'll be a happy ending in store for this pair, We'll see. I liked the action too. The battles were fun, the whole final clash, and also the Katolas soldiers taking on Erebos with the Scorpions. That was all very cool. Beyond that though, the story was largely dragged down for me by poor narrative decisions. The Sun Elf storyline, somehow they haven't learned that nobody gives a damn about this absolute waste of a story. I kind of thought they'd have a chance to turn it around though. They could have Janai being the opposite of Ezran and being able to forgive her brother, to offer him a second chance. After seasons and seasons wasted on this loser, I thought that Kareem was going to actually do something useful and fight to stop Erebos. Clearly he'd die trying and thus earn his Viren moment, but it could make this whole saga worth it for his character at least. Nope, it's not what happens. The idiot decides to try to join the guy that killed his older sister and immediately gets squashed and forgotten about. I will admit, at first I laughed at that, but how is this narratively satisfying? How is this good? If the story beat was that Erebos broke into his prison and kills him when searching for the Sun Orb or whatever it is, that would be funny. Especially if scenes hadn't been wasted on him beyond a throwaway glimpse at him being in prison. Kareem's story would have been over anyway, and it ties up the loose ends without Janai having to execute her brother. But instead they do this. They waste our time with multiple scenes where he refuses redemption, only for him to finally accept for the sake of being a hero to the elves, then betraying everybody and dying. Truly, writing worthy of an Emmy. The Sun Elf story has been consistently the worst storyline in the entire run of the show. The fact that it lasted the entirety of the second act is actually a farce. Now let's never speak about it ever again. But hey, it actually gets worse. This season managed to make me actively dislike Callum and Rayla. Why? Well, they bungled it all. At the end of last season, they finally turned things around for the show's main ship. After breaking them up off screen for reasons that were never really clear, and then forcing Callum to simply forgive her with no true apology or acknowledgement that what Rayla did was wrong, they decide to do more damage to this pair. They bring Runan to Katolas, Ezran arrests him, and Rayla and Callum seemingly don't understand why Ezran might even be slightly angry. What sort of mental gymnastics does Rayla have to do to be unable to realize that he is right to be upset, to hate her dad? Look, realistically, I did not mind her busting him out of prison because it makes a lot of sense. But it's the general attitude that permeates the story and the indication that the writers think she is righteous. It's the lack of accountability that pisses me off. On top of that, Callum betraying and ditching his brother is one thing. In the end, it actually needed to happen to allow Ezran to grow stronger. But what is up with him just being so cool with Runan? Just being happy in the Grove? At this point, he does think this guy killed his dad. Stepdad, yes, but he raised you, man. Come on. You can forgive somebody or move on, but buddying up with them and trying to earn their approval is absolutely wild to me. I have no idea what they were thinking with this storyline. What's worse is that Callum doesn't even seem all that cut up by betraying Ezran either. He's hyped to be in the Grove and to hang with the Elflings and whatever. And yeah, he's a little sad, but he seems to have no regrets at all. That feels unrealistic. In the end, it's the return of Erebos that forces his hand, that forces that contact. Then at the end, no apologies needed, apparently it's all good. Ugh, kill me, give me something for the pain and let me die. I beg you. It's just wrecked their story for me, and I found myself shaking my head and actively disliking these characters and when they're on screen. Side note as well, still no real proper apology from Rayla's dads for how she was treated. Remember, Ithari banished her too. And I don't even want to mention the whole crying apology from Runan to Ezran at the end. Ugh, I'm getting mad just thinking about that scene. But the worst thing of all, the story's unfinished. Erebos is still out there. He never even spoke to the other Star Elves. Come on. The Archdragons are all dead. The world has 7 years until he returns. Claudia's still out there. It's not looking good. Callum has this whole self-ban on dark magic. He was going to use it, but there's no discussion of anything further than that. It was a complete red herring plot point. There's so much more that needs to be tied up, so many loose ends, but there's no proof it's going to continue. So we have this huge cliffhanger and it's just, ugh. Actually, no, that's not even the worst thing. The worst thing is this continual discussion of how humans, elves, and dragons are all just as bad as one another. What? They even write the whole Magic Wars secret history that humans tried to hide to make humans look even worse. So let me get this right. According to the writers, humans were oppressed and seen as lesser life. When they're finally free, they make bad choices in regards to magic, and thus, in the writer's perspective, it's for the best that they can't use magic much. Come on. Apply this perspective to the real world, and it's nuts. And you'd think, wow, you're a piece of trash. This season murdered my hype for the show, absolutely killed it. A terrible ending. And now I just want to end this video and mourn. So with all that being said, these have all been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the latest season of The Dragon Prince? You like it? Hate it? Anything you'd like to add? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.